Okay, welcome everybody to our monthly genealogy presentation by Lisa Dougherty. I am going to turn it over to her. Take it away, Lisa.
Oh, good afternoon or good morning or good evening, wherever you are. I'm coming to you from Guilderland, New York, and it looks like it's spitting snow a little bit here, which, it's that time of year, so I guess we have to put up with it. So December, breaking down genealogy brick walls. This seems kind of a fitting topic for December. A lot of times we do genealogy work when we have the opportunity. Sometimes that's during the holidays because some people have downtime. Of course, this year there's been a little bit more downtime for most people. But genealogy brick walls are something that happen to everybody. So don't feel that even if you've been researching for many years or if you're a beginner, just realize that finding a brick wall in your family history is something that is going to happen to you eventually. So these are the kind of problems that we all face. And getting over those brick walls is something that people have blogged about and offered presentations about and given, information about strategies for many years. So it's a recognized thing that happens when we're working on our family tree, and inevitably it will happen to you. So I'm going to talk today about some of the common things that cause brick walls and also some things that we can do to get through them. So not only are we going to talk about why they happen, but we're also going to talk about what we can do to get over them or get through them. And if you do have any questions, just, don't hesitate to say, I have a question, and go ahead and ask it. Okay, so a brick wall is sort of does have an official definition. It's a genealogy problem that is hard to solve, and that's a very simplistic definition, but it gets to exactly what it is. It means that yes, there's a genealogy problem that we have, but it also implies that there is a way to solve it. I mean, a brick wall can be pretty hard to break through in any way, but if we have other information, we could potentially solve this brick wall and break through it. So it does imply that there is some sort of solution to be found somewhere, but we just have to know where to find it and how to go about it. So there are lots of things that lead to brick wall problems. There are lots of things that we encounter as we're doing our research that will lead you to a brick wall problem. And a lot of these things most of these things are things that all of us encounter on a regular basis. These are just some examples of some of the brick wall problems that people have a hard time overcoming. So very common names, working with very common names, things like Smith or Jones or Evans or names like that seems like everybody has. And everyone has named their child John Smith. And so you have 4 or 5 of them of the same age in a particular locality. So that could be very difficult using a common name. Also, conversely, on the other side of the coin is a name that is very uncommon, because then what you have is you have a lack of information. You can't find information about a particular name because there may be only one person that has that name. Spelling is always an issue, and spelling is a very common brick wall problem. Particularly genealogists that are not terribly experienced will often encounter problems when it comes to spelling. They tend to have a little bit of blinders on when it comes to spelling. They sometimes think, well, this is the way the name has always been spelled, and so they can't understand why they're not finding information under that particular spelling. So spelling is something that is always a problem. A lot of times, one of the things we will hear is, all of those records burned a long time ago. So to me, it seems sort of like a convenient excuse for people to not go and find records for you, that they can always refer to that fire that happened back in 1914 or whatever. So you really, in that situation, need to get your facts straight. You need to know whether that's accurate or not, and exactly what did die and get burned in the fire, if there was one. So that's something that's easily checked on. Some of us encounter brick walls because we're only searching on the internet. These days, it's kind of difficult to do anything else, but really your search needs to encompass a wider variety of information than what can be found on the internet. And yes, there is an awful lot that can be found on the internet, but In a lot of situations, the information that we're seeking is only going to be available in the local area where the ancestor lived. So you may need some bit of information that's only going to be available in a church record or in a family history book or in a file folder that has information about a family that's held in some library or historical society. So as much as there is on the internet, that's really only the tip of the iceberg. There are plenty of other things that are available only on site that need to be accessed. And that may be where you would find your brick wall solution. Of course, there are also things that happen when the researcher is inexperienced or when the researcher has a preconceived notion about what should be found. Things like, well, I was told my ancestor came from County Cork, or I was told that they always spelled their name in this way. So when we bring our own bias to research, that can absolutely give us a brick wall that we need to get over. So we need to be looking at our information critically. We need to be looking at our information and saying to ourselves, is this something that I really know for sure? Or is this something that I just think I know? So it's looking at our evidence in a critical way. Another big one is being unaware of the sources that are available. This is something that happens to everyone because not every family history researcher can be advised of every single resource that is available to help find their ancestor. A lot of times that only comes with experience. When you are researching particular ethnic groups or you're researching in different places, specific places, you become more aware of the resources that are available as you conduct research. So if you've been researching Irish ancestors your whole life, and then all of a sudden you start researching a Polish ancestor for your friend, you're probably not going to be aware of what resources might be available for Polish research. So again, it's an education. You're going to have to become more educated about the resources that might be available. The other thing is, and this is a big one even for now, because at this point, we don't have access to a lot of the resources that are needed for our research. So for example, if we are going to find a naturalization record for Albany County, we know that those records are housed at the Albany County Hall of Records. At this point, the access to the Hall of Records is limited. So that's one of the limitations of the resources that we need for research. And the state library continues to be closed. So that's another very important resource for research. So there are certainly issues with accessibility, especially now during this time, but also the issues could have something to do with where you live. Maybe the resources you need to research for your family are located in Illinois, and you can't go there for whatever reason. So there are lots of reasons why we might not have access to the sources that we need to overcome our brick wall. So, okay, so we know what our brick wall problems are. We know what kinds of issues we might face. How can we get through that wall and jumpstart our research? So these are just going to be some tips. Some of them are going to be common sense. Others, hopefully, just different suggestions that maybe you can use to help you get through this brick wall situation. But one of the things that is a very obvious kind of thing, but something that we don't sometimes think to do, is to take a look at what we've already got. Go back through the information that we have and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Because a lot of times we get to the point where we've seen our own research so much that we are kind of not seeing it anymore. Because we're so used to dealing with the same things, the same names, the same people, the same dates, that we don't go back and look at what we've already done and look at it with fresh eyes. An alternative to this would be to have someone else take a look at your research, maybe another genealogy researcher that you know, is to have someone look at it, and that way they're looking at it through their eyes. They're not looking at it through your eyes, and they may be able to find something that you didn't pick up on. Organization is key. You really need to have your research organized. If your research is not organized, you're going to have a very difficult time trying to figure out what types of documents or what types of records could offer a question to your brick wall problem. If you don't know what your problem is, then you can't easily address figuring out how to solve it. So being organized is very important. Another thing I like to do sometimes is every once in a while, I will just have this problem ancestor and I will sit down and I will make a timeline for them. So in other words, I'll start with when they were born and I'll write down what years they appeared in the census, what year they got married, and I will make a timeline of it. So that shows me where I have holes in my research. There's nothing like a timeline to say, oh, wow, I've got this whole period from 1870 to 1890 where I don't know where he is. So that brings those holes to your attention. It allows you to look at them and say, oh, wow, okay, I didn't realize I was missing all of this. So when you put them in a timeline, it makes those holes and it makes those gaps a lot more prevalent and a lot easier for you to recognize. Software is a great organizing tool. There are so many different choices of software, and I've done a whole program on different types of software, but software really makes it easy for you to be organized. It makes it easier for you to be able to see where the holes are. It makes it easy for you to be able to see what sources you've checked. So it helps you when you are looking for information to have things in software. It's a lot easier to just type a name in a search box to search for somebody in your family tree than it is to go through file folders and papers and filing cabinets and all of that. So getting the information into the software is a challenge and a chore. But once it's in there, it's invaluable for the organization that it provides. This is one of the things that software will do for you. It will make timelines for you. It will generate them automatically. So whatever you put into your software as far as events for your ancestor's life, your software can give back to you in a timeline form. So that allows you to see with a better visual reference where you stand as far as information about your ancestor goes. So when you can do it, have it generated automatically, and you don't have to actually sit down with pencil and paper, then it makes it a little easier and it allows you to use your time more efficiently. So another thing that we can do that might help us with our brick wall problems is go back to the original source. So one of the things that we're doing when we're working with online records is a lot of times we go and we find our ancestor in a census record or some other type of record that we find on Ancestry. And what we're getting when we do that search is a lot of times we're just getting transcribed records. We're getting things that some human has transcribed into software, and then Ancestry then indexes it to make it easy for people to find. So one of the mistakes that a lot of people are making is that they're not looking at the actual records. So a lot of the time what we do is we rely on things like indexes to tell us information about our ancestors. So this is a particular example that I have here, and this comes from the New York City Vital Records Index that is indexed on both the Italian genealogical group and the German genealogical group. And this was done a few years back to facilitate people to have access to the New York City records, which it was a wonderful thing when it was working. It's still working, but it was a wonderful thing at the time because this was the only online access we had to New York City records. So here's a record for two individuals that got married, Sarah Penders and John Reynolds. And it tells us the day and the year that they got married, and it tells us that they got married in Manhattan, but it doesn't really give us anything else. So if if my brick wall was Sarah and I wanted to know who her parents were or where she was born, this information from this index is not going to give it to me. It does give me her date of marriage and it does give me the person that she married, but it doesn't give me anything else. So since then, Family Search has put some of these same entries on their website. And this, again, is a transcribed copy. Now, are there advantages to transcriptions? Of course there are. These are much easier to read than handwritten records. we can look at this and we can say, okay, this is the record that I'm looking for because this is the person that I'm looking for. So we're looking at it and it's all typed up and it's very nice and it's easy to read. So it's definitely something that is a good thing. But the other problem that we're having here is that we're looking at this information and we're realizing that this is somebody's interpretation of the writing on the actual certificate. This is not our interpretation. We're not looking at this. We're looking at a transcription. So someone looked at this record and said, this is what I think it says. So if we disagree with something like that, how do we know? Because we haven't even looked at the record. So this has a little bit more information than the last entry we looked at. For example, it's got Sarah's birthplace as Minchville, New York. I have no idea where that is. And then it has her parents' names, Patrick Penders, and her mother's name is Heather. So again, I'm wondering about that because it seems a little weird to me, especially since I don't know where Minchville is. But if I go back to the original record and I order a copy of it or I get the original record from somewhere, I can look at this and I can say, I can make the interpretation as to what I think these things say. I don't have to rely on what someone else has decided that they say. So in this case, it tells us her birthplace and it does look like Minchville. And if I didn't know what towns were in New York, I might think it meant Minchville too. It's actually Mineville, which is a town in Essex County. And then we have her father, Patrick Penders. It could be Peterson, it almost looks like. And her mother, Heather, which that is not her mother's name, but it's sort of like her mother's last name. So my point is that original records, actual images of records, are going to give you another perspective. They're going to give you more information, first of all. And second of all, they're going to allow you to make the interpretation of what the record says. You don't have to rely on what someone else has said it says. We see this a lot with census records. Ancestry has the census records kind of transcribed when you search for them, but you lose a lot when you don't look at the original census record. If you look at the original census record, you're going to get a lot more information than what's included in a transcription. You're going to be able to see the people's neighbors. You're going to be able to see if someone else lives in the house that might be useful to you. So there's going to be a lot more information in the actual copy than what you see transcribed. And yes, writing is difficult to read, but it's something that we do all the time. And you can get help with handwriting from people in your own house. You can post records on Facebook groups and people will take guesses at what things are as far as writing goes. So there is help available out there to help with the writing. And also over time, you do get used to it and you get used to seeing what things say. So it does get easier as you go along. Okay, now a big one, name variations. It used to be a joke that we always used to say in the National Archives that you could always tell the beginning genealogists because they were the ones that insisted that their name was always spelled the same way. And it is kind of true that a lot of us have a bias with our name. When we first start out doing our genealogy work, we think, oh, well, my name was spelled W-A-L-S-H, so it's always been called that. It's always been spelled like that. And people that are spelled W-E-L-C-H, they're not related to me. They're a different family altogether. Well, as we do genealogy and as we get further into this, we realize that there are no hard and fast rules when it comes to spelling. And that's because standardized spelling really didn't exist until about the early to mid 20th century. Prior to that, names were subject to all kinds of spelling variations. And the reality of that was mostly because there was not the need for a large paper trail for any one person. So a person wasn't going around signing their name and putting their social security number to everything like we do. So their name would be either the way they spelled it, or if they were illiterate, the way whatever clerk was writing their name down, however that person heard it, or whatever their own personal bias was when it came to spelling. So spelling is subject to change. So how do we overcome that? And how do we get over that? That's really hard. We have to start thinking like we need to put variation as part of our normal thinking. So we need to think that variations in spelling is going to be the norm. It's going to be what we have to do all the time. We have to look for variations in spelling. One of the things I like to do is I like to make a list of names that I personally encounter as I'm researching, so that when I encounter a strange one, I can look and I can say, oh yeah, I saw that one a couple of months ago and it's on my list. So if you keep a running list, it can be very helpful for you to be able to encounter that. This is especially important with people, say, for example, of French Canadian descent. A lot of times what will happen is they will be using a particular name in Canada. Then when they come to the United States, they may anglicize that name. They may shorten the name. They may make it easier to spell. So a name that has one form in Canada may have a completely different form in the United States. And so that's something you really want to keep track of. You want to keep track of what information you've seen about different spellings of names, so that when you see something that looks right, you have a list to work from. There are also first names that are going to vary. So you will see sometimes first names that are a formal name, such as Elizabeth. So, your aunt's name was Elizabeth, but she could have been called Betty or Bessie or Lizzie or Eliza. So any of those are accepted nicknames. Sometimes some of the Irish ones are a little crazy. Like, for example, Bridget and Delia are the same name. Who knew? Owen and Eugene are the same name. Who knew? Those are just things that you learn as you work along. You're going to find aliases. As I mentioned, with French Canadians, they tend to use more than one name during their lifetime. They will sometimes use an alias name, which is also called a deet name. They will often use different first names. So it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, and it will vary a little bit depending on ethnic groups. But a lot of times what you'll find is sometimes you'll find a person that comes to the United States and has a very difficult sounding or spelled last name. And so they choose to shorten it or to anglicize it in order to fit in better or to make it easier to spell or whatever it is they decide to do. But be aware that there's probably going to be lots of variations, and a person can certainly use several different names over their lifetime. So we also need, as I was saying, is to expand our search beyond the internet. And because we are not able really to get out and do any research at this point, what it is a good time to do is it's a good time to start identifying resources that you might be able to use when libraries reopen. So if you are interested in a place that's not close to you, or if you're planning to maybe do a research trip eventually, right now would be a really good time to research what is available in the local area. So if you're going, say, to Cleveland, Ohio, and you need to do research there, it would be a great time to research the library holdings in Cleveland. What types of information do they have in those libraries that would be able to help you? Most libraries have very extensive catalogs on their website. I mean, down to, extremely detailed resources. So if you're looking for information about a particular community even, you may be able to find that in the library's catalog. A good place to start would be with WorldCat. WorldCat is a website that searches library catalogs all over the world. That would be a really good place to start looking for specific information about your ancestor. So while we have the opportunity to be home and doing research about how to do research, it would be a good time to start looking into those resources that maybe you'll be able to take advantage of in 2021. Fingers crossed. All right, so these are just a few of our local repositories here, things that are really good resources in the local area, and any one of them is going to be able to help you with things in the local area. Just real briefly, Crandall Library in Glens Falls has an excellent local history room. Schenectady County Historical Society, really good resources there. Albany County Hall of Records, the Brookside Museum in Ballston Spa, Troy Library, and of course the State Library. And, as many as we have listed here, there are many more. But again, it's going to be up to you to check out the websites for these repositories to see what they have to offer you. And it may be the very thing that would help you get over your brick wall. So also that goes along hand in hand with that is to explore the area where your ancestor lived. And again, this is fortunately something that we can do online, which is good. We can use Google Maps. We can look for addresses where our ancestors lived. We can go to the county gem web pages and we can see what types of resources they have listed on them. Some of the county gen web pages are a little outdated, but some of them are kept up with and they have really good resources. For example, Saratoga County, I know, keeps up with theirs pretty well. So there's lots of good information there. Find a Grave, Billion Graves, great resources for finding out where our ancestors may be buried. But also, that not everybody that's buried in the cemetery has a headstone. So you may not be able to find them through that way. But it may help you locate cemeteries in a local area that you are interested in. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize that they can do is that you can email a local library and sometimes they will look up an obituary for you. So I had an opportunity, or I had a situation this past year where I was doing some research for a woman, and her uncle had died in a drowning accident in County Kerry in Ireland. And I looked and looked and looked online for an obituary and I couldn't find one. So I finally emailed the local library in the area where he lived, and they very graciously looked up the obituary for me and they sent it to me via email. So this is something that you can do. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask librarians these questions. And all they can do is say, no, we don't have time, or maybe here's a volunteer that will do it, or something like that. But if you offer to, it's great if you give an exact date for that type of thing, because that makes it a lot easier. Most of the time these days, people are not copying and sending anything. They're just sending it via email. So even if they just take a picture with their phone and send it to you, whatever works. But don't be afraid to ask. And especially in the current climate, I think a lot of library employees are doing more of this now because they're not handling patrons in person. So they are able to do maybe a little bit more. So definitely don't be afraid to ask. All right, another thing that is really useful. I think when we do our family tree, we're very concentrated on going straight back. So we go back to our grandparents and our great-grandparents and our great-great-grandparents, and we're fixated on getting as far back as we can go. Well, sometimes the best strategy is to work horizontally instead of vertically. Sometimes we will be able to find out more about our particular ancestor if we research the people around them. Because we know if we have one person to research, we're only going to be looking for information about one person. If we have a group of people to research, then certainly the chances of finding information increase because we're talking about a larger amount of people. So if our ancestor died very young and died before there were death certificates or died before there were obituaries in the newspaper, maybe his brother or sister lived a lot longer and there's information about the brother or sister. But we're not ever going to find that unless we research the people around our ancestor. And genealogist Elizabeth Schoen Mills calls this the fan club. And the concept basically is that you want to research the friends and family, the associates, and the neighbors of your ancestor. Because all of these people are in some important way affiliated with your ancestor. Even if it's not an obvious in your face kind of relationship that you can immediately identify, these people that live around your ancestor, the people that serve as witnesses or sponsors for church events, people that are in business with your ancestor, all of these people have the potential for giving you really good information about your ancestor. Rarely is it the ancestor that lives in a vacuum, that doesn't have any associations with family or friends or people in their immediate local area. So these people are extremely valuable when it comes to getting information about your own particular ancestor. All kinds of hints from all kinds of records. Your census records are going to give you good clues. I don't know how many times I have saved a census record for a particular person I was looking for, and then gone back later on and looked at the same census record and seen a brother or sister or some relative a couple of houses above or below. So there are tons of times when I do this, and I'm always astounded at the close proximity that these people live in. Because back in those days, of course, people didn't have cars, they didn't have mass transportation, and they lived near enough to their relatives to be able to walk to their house. So there are a lot of people that are living in close proximity with each other and that you may not even know is connected to your ancestor. Also, there's the baptism records. There's baptism sponsors were very often aunts or uncles, and marriage witnesses were often close family. I've even seen situations where fathers served as witnesses to their children's marriage. So there are lots of family connections when it comes to those basic things like baptisms, marriages, and even funerals. Funeral pallbearers tend to be relatives. So definitely very good sources for information about your ancestor. Well, then there's always education. Education is a big thing. If we don't know what types of resources are available, then we're not going to know to look for them. Education is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. And this is one of the things that has improved during this situation, is that educational opportunities out there in the genealogy world have basically exploded. There are free programs and webinars every single day going on about a variety of topics. There are so many different things to choose from that you could literally be watching something different every single day. There are many resources for being able to locate these things. One of them that just bears out special mention is Legacy Family Tree. They have a website and an entire webinar library that has hundreds of webinars on it. It is, you do have to sign up for a subscription to view them, but they offer a weekly webinar and they also have a free section. So the weekly webinars are free for a couple of weeks after they air. And then there are also others on the site that are free. Another great source for videos and how-tos is the Family Search Wiki. That's another great place where you'll be able to find things. And even YouTube. Just if you go into YouTube and you search genealogy, you're going to find a huge array of different videos there. Education is going to help you. It's going to help you figure out what types of records may address your specific brick wall problem. If you know that there's a good chance you might be able to find out what happened to your ancestor through a military record, but you don't know anything about military records, then that's a good place to start. Start looking at webinars, or look at blogs, or look at websites about how to use military records. So when you have knowledge and when you know how to use a particular record set, or you know where to locate that particular record set, then you're going to be able to use your time much more efficiently. And I don't know about you, but sometimes if I'm working on a brick wall problem and I get to the point where, oh, I know I need to look at military records, but I don't know anything about them. Overcoming our inertia because of our ignorance, it's a tough thing to do. I mean, I tend to put those things off like everybody else. But it is definitely a good idea to seek out some type of educational opportunity, because that is going to help you to get over that brick wall. So there's possibilities out there. So that's a good challenge for the new year. These are just some of the sources for the educational information. Family Search Wiki is a great place to start. Genia Webinars is a blog that talks about different webinars that are up and coming. But like I mentioned, Legacy Family Tree, that's a really good place to look for information about tuning into webinars. One of the things I did last week was I went through the Legacy Family Tree library, and I made a list of probably 20 or 30 different webinars that I want to watch in the next year. So there's so many good topics. You would be forever looking at them. So definitely it's a wonderful time to be working on genealogy online. All right, then there's always the ask for help. Of course, you want to ask for help. If you don't know something, if you are not able to figure it out, or if you just want a quick answer, then ask somebody. Maybe you know someone who's also working on genealogy who could help you. Maybe you are a member of a Facebook group. Facebook groups are very good at helping people. Most of the Facebook groups are either organized by people who are really experienced or do this every day. So if you have a question about anything, it's a good place to ask a question is social media, and especially on Facebook groups. I myself have done a fair amount of volunteering. I don't do it now because I can't get out and into the libraries. I am still doing the Irish American Heritage Museum in Albany last Wednesday of every month, however, not during December. So I will be back there at the end of January. So if you want to see somebody in person, I'll be there by appointment at the end of January. And hopefully sometime in 2021, be back at my other in-person gigs, but we'll see. All right, now a few often overlooked resources, and there's a lot of them. This is an overview of some of the things that are often overlooked, but could be potential sources of solving brick wall problems. And again, a lot of these are things that are very intimidating to people. Like for me, land records and wills and probate tend to be very, very intimidating. So I sometimes avoid them. State census records are easy, very accessible. City directories take a bit of analysis, but they're still good. Special census sometimes can have some information, but they're fairly easy to access. PERSI is the periodical record source index, and that's got some interesting things in it, but it does take a little chasing down. All right, so land and property records are basically when people buy and sell land, these are the records that are left. And they are generally pretty good. For most areas, they tend to go back to, in some cases, the 1700s, in other cases, the 1600s. Some of them are available online, especially on Family Search. Just widely depends on the area. It's something that's worth learning how to use, because they can come in very handy. But they're definitely an overlooked resource. Wills and probate records. Whenever I do venture into this area, I'm always very pleasantly surprised at the things that can happen, especially when it comes to people's wills and records that are generated when a person dies. You can find many proofs of relationships in these things. There's lots of very interesting things that happen in wills. So there's a lot of things out there as far as will and probate records. There's also lots of guides that help you to navigate that world and where to find them and how to use them. So there's lots of things out there that will be helpful for that. The New York State Census is something that I don't think a lot of people know about. The New York State Census was taken on the 5-year, and in a lot of ways, it's way more detailed than the federal census is. So if you have an ancestor that lived in New York, especially in the middle 19th century, you may be able to find some really good information in these census records that is not available in a federal census. They're available on Ancestry and Family Search. You can search either one of them for these records, and you will find some very interesting tidbits. For example, 1865 can tell you if your ancestor was a Civil War veteran. 1855 will tell you how long your ancestor has lived in a particular community, in the community they lived in. So there are those little tidbits. Some of them tell you the county that your ancestor was born in. So if your ancestor was born in New York and they were born in Columbia County, it will tell you they were born in Columbia County. So it gives you a little bit more information than the federal census. City directories are really good sources for putting people where and when. And for some communities like New York City or even like Albany, a city directory can be invaluable. because if you're looking for a death of your Michael Murphy and he died in Albany and there's 40 men named Michael Murphy that died in Albany, if you are looking up his obituary and you have his address, then you're going to be able to identify which one is your Michael Murphy. So the city directories will give you street addresses. They will give you occupations. Sometimes the later directories will give a wife's name. They sometimes give dates of death for people. I don't think the Albany one does. I know the Troy one does. They will sometimes also give you information about where your ancestor might have moved to. So if your ancestor moved from one community to another, sometimes that will be included. So the city directory is sort of what the precursor to the modern phone book, but it really has a little bit more information than a phone book does. So it's a really good resource. Special census schedules were taken for different reasons. A lot of them are statistical in nature. They have to do with the size of your farm, how many bales of hay you produce, how many pigs or chickens you have. A lot of that information is included in the special censuses. There's also some that were taken to record the names of people that died or were married within the census year. This can be great for the time before vital records, so that might be something worth checking out. As I mentioned, the 1865 New York State Census gives information about soldiers that were returning from the Civil War, so that's also very helpful information. Special censuses are available anywhere you would access your regular census records, so they're not difficult to find. And then finally, the periodical source index. It is basically an index to articles that are in periodicals. So there are many, 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 many genealogy societies in the United States and around the world, and most of them have publications. Most of them have at least 4 times a year newsletter that goes out. And Percy is a way to access articles from those publications. You can look things up by names of people. You can look things up by location. It's a way to find articles in periodicals, especially of genealogical interest. It can be accessed on the website Find My Past, which is a subscription website. And then if you find something that you liked and that you want to see, it's very possible you might be able to find it in the New York State Library. And I'm not sure if you can email them and have them send it to you or not. It's something that you certainly could try. So again, it's just another source. So those are just a few of the suggestions. And of course, there are many, many more. But hopefully something in there might, get you going and get you started and help you to be able to overcome some of your brick walls in 2021. So who's got questions so I can take a drink?
If anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourself at the bottom, or you can type them into the chat and we can read them out. It's a lot of information again, Lisa.
A lot of information, yes.
Very informative.
Yeah, and you could probably just break this into 2 presentations and still have a ton of resources. So there's a lot out there, and not everybody can think of everything. So that's why you have to put it out there.
Yeah, well, and it's good to know how many different avenues you can go down. When you find a wall in your path one way, there's another direction you can take. Or
absolutely, there's always some way to get through things, and again, it may just be a question of you can't access it, or you don't know about it, or those are a lot of the problems that we have. So if you can educate yourself, you may find out about it, only to find out that you can't access it. There's always that.
Don't see anything in chat right now. We are recording this, so it'll take a day or so, but it will be up on the library's YouTube channel pretty soon. So if you want to go back and revisit anything, or if you want to share it with somebody else who you think might be interested, feel free to send them there. I will send a link around to it once it's up and ready to go.
And if anybody's got any particular brick wall problem that they're working on right now that they would like some input with, you can feel free to either ask me about it now or email me. I'd be glad to help. I might have some ideas. Who knows? I don't think my brain is complete mush at this point, but it's getting there.
Lucky you. Oh,
Definitely getting there.
we've got a question here. Let me
Okay, cool.
see.
Not so much a question, but just to agree with Lisa. Um, Definitely with Irish records, spelling is notorious. Like it's just, I have seen the surname Naughton, Naughton,
Hmm.
spelt as Knocton. So
I believe it.
you have to think of any way that it could possibly be spelt. Um, Definitely agree with the Walsh, yeah, and
Yeah,
Flaherty's and Flaherty's.
yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely,
You have to be very, I think I've heard it described as you have to be very loose when it comes to spelling.
yes.
You really have got to just sort of let your mind wander.
Yeah,
And and I have had I've had the same experience that you have with,
yeah.
sometimes you're looking at it and you're thinking, you've got to be kidding me.
Um, John Grenham, he's a genealogist here in Ireland. He's kind of like the daddy of us all here. But he has a website, and so he has like variations. You can find variations of spellings. So sometimes, a site like that can be useful.
Absolutely. Yes. And it's very good because if you put your name that you're interested in into that site, it will give you a list of the
Yeah.
variations. And
Mm.
those variations come from actual records. So, he knows where they come from and they're actual things that have been written. So we know that they're authentic. But yes, it's a problem for sure.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, like I said, if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to send me an email and I'll be very happy to answer anything that you might have. And I know what we've got the next few months figured out, don't we, Tanea? We have like what we're doing for programs for the next few months.
Yep, we have our next one is January 11th, again at noon, and that is working with New York State Census Records. And then on February 8th, we have searchingancestry.com to find what you really want. And I didn't write down what March is, but those are the next 2 months.
Okay. Yep. And I don't remember I didn't write down March either, of course. It's written down somewhere, but not accessible.
Right.
Okay, yeah. So that's next. So next month we're going to talk about New York State Census Records. They're a really great resource if you're not familiar with them. They're one of the best resources I think we have in New York State because they can give us so much detailed information about our ancestors. So definitely make sure that you tune in for that one. So if nobody else has got any questions or anything, then I will bid you all goodbye and happy holidays. And just hang in there because hopefully the end is in sight for all this.
Thanks for joining us today, everybody. And thanks again. See you all next month.